Mike, you're all set.
Mike Ritzema here with i3 Business Solutions, joined by Nate Steed with Warner Norcross and Judd. Today we're talking about cybersecurity compliance with an attorney who has experience and business email compromise, especially in prevention from a legal perspective. I always like to pause a minute and say, technology, all this technology and all the stuff we do, AI and everything, what's the purpose of technology? What's the purpose of business? Well, we use these tools to improve productivity, profitability. How do we differentiate ourselves from our competitors? And then lastly, risk management. Today, we're talking about risk mitigation. How do we protect the organization financially and technologically? It is October, it's Halloween month, and the United States declares it Cybersecurity Month. We're going to talk today. Let's not get tricked. In fact, let's use technology as a treat. Let's be vigilant. Let's be paranoid. Let's be scared of the bad actors out there. And today we're really talking about disinformation security. We talk about information or technology security. No, we're talking about disinformation. How are the threat actors using social engineering to invade our technology, invade our business? So our speaker today, Nate Steed. Nate and I have worked together regretfully on some tragic situations. He is an attorney locally here that focuses exclusively on technology and data-related legal work. He's got stories, and he's in the midst of some right now. So Nate, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. And it's only regretful in the circumstances that we find ourselves in with these clients, not necessarily our personalities and working together. So thank you for joining this morning to talk about business email compromise. The one thing I want to highlight through this, and I think Mike nailed it here, is that really there is reason to be scared, but there's also a lot of things you can do to help yourself in the context of business email compromise specifically. By volume, business email compromise is the #1 phone call I get when we are dealing with any sort of data security incident. Ransomware, where your system is shut down and business grinds to a halt, is certainly popular in media and gets a lot of the headlines, but the run-of-the-mill business email compromise scenarios are really what are driving a lot of the losses and reported claims dealing with cybersecurity incidents. And these are some numbers from the FBI. You can see total cybercrime last year was $16.6 billion, so not insignificant. Business email compromise is $8.5 billion over the last 3 years. Business email compromise itself is among the most costly category of data security incidents that we see. And I think a lot of this is largely driven, at least in the last year, by the rise of AI, large language models, and the ability for threat actors to really provide convincing emails or communications that can trick you. There has been a 4,000% increase in phishing emails over the last year. And again, I think that's largely driven by AI. Gone are the days when you can get an email from a threat actor that has misspellings or poor grammar or just doesn't look convincing. Now, at the click of a button, threat actors can really generate emails, even if English isn't their first language. They can do it in any language that they speak or that you speak and make an email look really convincing. I thought this was a really interesting statistic, again, from the FBI. This is on reported claims last year. You can see that in that 30 to 50 range of individuals, there's not a significant difference among either the amount of claims or the amount of money lost. Obviously, I think with the younger folks, there are fewer claims, maybe because they're more technically savvy, but also fewer losses, probably because they just don't have a lot of money to lose. Whereas you look at the 60 plus group, there's a lot of money there to be lost and a lot of claims. Again, I think threat actors taking advantage of an older population who aren't necessarily as technologically sophisticated to be able to identify some of these threats as easily. But I think it's important to look in that 30 to 60 range. There's a lot of money and a lot of claims in there. And as you think about your workforce and the employee profile that you have, probably a lot of them fit in that 30 to 60 range, which is, as you can see from the chart, really the one of the categories that is most prone to being a victim of these different types of claims. The reason it works is, like I said earlier, there are very convincing ways to prove to you or convince you that a threat actor looks like a real person. And these oftentimes rely on social engineering. As Mike said, we don't want to get tricked in this Halloween season. And that's really what these are designed to do. These sort of schemes are designed to trick you to redirect money or provide account access to somebody who shouldn't otherwise have it. And the common flavors of business email compromise that we see are invoice or vendor fraud, where one party impersonates another to misdirect payments, executive like CEO or CFO fraud, where somebody impersonates an executive to elicit some sort of response from you, either sending information or money to a third party where it shouldn't go, or payroll or W-2 diversion, again, sending information or money to a threat actor when it looks like you shouldn't. One of the challenges here is there's often no malware or viruses that are involved. That's not to say there aren't technological solutions here, but you are typically not having your computer taken over by a virus. This looks like normal business, whether it's an email, whether it's an invoice, whether it's some sort of approval from an executive. This all looks like what you would normally see in the operation of your business. And I think if we think back to those first slides on the amount of money involved, that's why there is so much money, because these are the type of relationships or scenarios where you would expect to have these communications that turn out to be something other than it is. Oftentimes in this space, we think about technological solutions, and this is largely not a technology problem. It's typically a people problem. I've spoken with several IT folks who say we try to make our systems idiot proof, but they keep making better idiots. And I think that's really one of the truths in cybersecurity space, is that we can spend a lot of money on technological solutions, but ultimately we are dealing with people who can undo those solutions relatively easily. And like I said, it's disguised often as normal business. And as we wind up the end of the year here, some things to especially look out for are scenarios where W-2s or taxes may be specifically targeted. We're headed into open enrollment season. So if you have benefits, you might be wary of emails purporting to be around open enrollment, where those would be easily faked. They oftentimes require a click to a separate portal to get information, or opening up an attachment to get information. But all of these are what are called adversary in the middle attacks, where the bad guy will insert themselves in the middle of the communications, and you may not even realize that that is the case. So, like I said, there typically is the situation of the adversary in the middle, where they are either trying to steal access to your account or steal any sort of credentials to access other information. You might have seen emails that you've received from third parties that say, "Hey, please make sure you don't click on any links you receive from emails from us," where their email account was potentially compromised. Or again, like I said, where you have an executive who is saying, "I need gift cards," or "I need you to send payment to this person," or "I need you to send me this information." One of the challenges is, I think more and more, there's this concept of multi-factor authentication fatigue, where we're getting all sorts of prompts on our phone or through another app to click on something to say like, "Hey, you need to verify your access." And we're all busy. We have a lot of stuff going on through the day. And if you mindlessly click on a link that you've received, you could have inadvertently opened yourself up to unauthorized access to your account or your information. One of the concerns I have often in this space, and Mike and I have seen this, is when an email account is compromised, you may be receiving an email from a legitimate source, but the person is not legitimate. In other words, their email account was compromised. You are getting what looks like a legitimate email. It has all the hallmarks of a legitimate email because it is, but it is asking you to do something that may seem a little bit squirrely or a little bit off. And we'll talk about some things you can do to prevent that. But these are particularly pernicious for that reason. It becomes really challenging when you, as the recipient, are receiving an email that otherwise looks legitimate. I want to touch on AI briefly here because it is becoming so popular in the public and worrisome. This is a case out of Hong Kong from last year where a clerk was invited into a video conference within their company, and there were multiple people within the video conference. They all looked like real people in that. In that video conference, an executive told that clerk to make 15 different wire transfers to 5 local banks to the tune of $20 million. The problem is this executive who made the request was not actually the executive. It was somebody who had created a deep fake of the executive and in the video conference looked like a real person asking this clerk to wire $20 million to these different banks. Turns out none of it was real. It becomes a challenge as again if you have employees or individuals within your organization who have a very public presence, whether that is speaking engagements or podcasts or things like that, where they have a lot of media out there to be consumed. It becomes easier for the fraudsters to mimic that and create videos that don't necessarily have to be very long, but can be very convincing in short doses to get somebody to perform an action that is really benefiting the threat actors at the end of the day. Again, if you're called into a meeting with a lot of participants, that's another scenario where you may want to be extra vigilant on what the potential risk you are facing. So the common scenarios, I touched on this a little bit. One is this vendor bank change. And so you always want to be wary when you are receiving a request for changing payment information. If you have a vendor who reaches out to you to say, hey, we've had a change in our bank account, please now wire money to this bank account. The problem is you may wire that money and 2 weeks later they come back and ask you, hey, where's our money? And you said, I already did it. And they said, we never got it. And then you unroll or unwind the situation and realize what has happened. You have sent money to a third party and the vendor didn't get it, but you're out the money. And so both of you are sitting there looking at each other, trying to figure out what to do. This is probably the most common question we get as attorneys is, what do we do about this? What does the law say we need to do to handle this scenario? The challenge is that there are not very many court cases dealing with this specific scenario. We've checked throughout the country, and there's only about half a dozen over the last 10 years that talk about how to handle this, and the laws are really silent on this as well. What typically ends up happening, though, is the court says the party that was in the best situation to avoid the issue or prevent it should bear the risk of loss. So, for example, if your account was compromised and you are the one who made the payment, then, or you are the one who demanded payment at a separate account, then you are out that money. Now, the problem is, or like if on the flip side, if you're the customer and you received an email that looked a little bit weird, there were some telltale signs that it may have been an illegitimate email, then you are out that money and you would have to repay. The problem is these are never clear-cut scenarios. There is oftentimes blame, if you want to call it that, on both sides of the ledger. One account was compromised, but there may be some issues with the email or the request itself. Maybe something was against policy on one side or the other. And so really, there's not one party that is fully at fault here. Like I said, there's fault to share on both sides. So the parties usually end up just splitting the baby somewhere in the middle and repaying some amount of the money. There's other dynamics certainly at play here where you have a vendor who doesn't want to lose a customer, or a customer who has to rely on a vendor for a specific product or service. So you can't really move away immediately either. You want to maintain that good relationship. So again, usually that money gets paid back in some form or fashion, usually at a lesser amount. Another common scenario we've seen is something called payroll diversion. And this can be really challenging for a company because you may not have had any fault in this at all, where an employee maybe clicks on an account or clicks on a link or shares account information for their own payroll login, maybe their bank information or the HR system, and then the threat actor changes where their paychecks should go, their direct deposit should go. You, as the company, receive this new information, start sending these new paychecks to a new account, and within one or two pay cycles, that employee is coming back saying, "Hey, I never got my money. Where is it?" Um, and then you again unwind the scenario and determine that this employee had their account information compromised. Those are the most common scenarios that we see. And then in that situation, you as a company are faced with a decision of trying to figure out, what do you do for this employee? Do you try to make them whole, or do you recognize that the employee bears some of that burden? But again, you want to maintain good employee relationships and contacts there. So it's not always a clear-cut legal decision, or oftentimes there maybe is a difference between what legally you can do and morally what you decide you might want to do. It's not all doom and gloom. There are some things that you can do to address this situation. I want to talk about people, and I want to talk about tech, and I'll rely on Mike to weigh in on some of the tech solutions here. But as far as the people and process goes, you want to think through having some out of band callback procedure, something that doesn't rely on the initial communication thread to verify the validity of a request. That may be a phone call to a known phone number, some pre-existing phone number, not a phone number that has been shared via email. Just a real quick story. I had one client who received a payment request that was expected. The amount of the payroll, or the amount of the payment request, was expected, but again, it was a request to send it to a different bank account with a phone number to call to verify. Well, that employee called that phone number. The person sounded legitimate. They had never actually spoken on the phone with them before, and they were in a different country, so they didn't really recognize the voice. There was some accent, some language barriers, but they said, "Well, this sounds legitimate." Wired the money to the new account. It turns out they were dealing with threat actors the entire time. They thought they had done the right thing in making the phone call, but what they had done was called the number that was shared via the compromised account, which ultimately did them no good. Sometimes you want to have dual controls or some cool off period for some of these things, as far as like change in that information that you might instigate it after one or two pay periods or something like that. When you're doing onboarding, you want to make sure that you have some account verification that allows you to understand what the process is for payment information if you have a vendor, or you'll be regularly sending payments without any further checks, whether it's or checks or controls, whether it's a regular recurring payment or something like that, or understand what is the account or payment information change process. Now, there's also some technology that you can use here. And Mike, do you want to chime in real quick on some of the things that you offer or folks can implement to really prevent this sort of thing from happening?
Yeah, two things. I mean, on MFA fatigue, which you mentioned, I'm getting a phone call every day. Every day I get a voicemail from some organization that wants to loan me money, and I block it, but it's a different phone number every day. I'm ready to answer this thing and just say, I don't want your loan. Don't call me again. Yeah, that's, phone call, voicemail fatigue. And that's what happens with MFA. You mentioned that earlier, Nate, is people just get weary. It's like, oh, it pops up on your phone. It pops up on your phone. It's like, okay, yeah, I'll approve it. Wrong answer, wrong answer. But technology marches on, and phishing, you mentioned, video phishing, basically an AI generated image and voice showing up on a conference call. That's real. Technology marches on. The threats change. Quishing is a new thing. A QR code. And we're all getting really comfortable just gunning QR codes. That's a problem. We have to figure out how to prevent threat actors getting through that way. But specifically, on how do we prevent it. Because what happens, much like the phone call I'm getting, is you get an email from DocuSign, or you get a Microsoft login request for two factors. So you change your email and you put, or you change your password and you put in the 6-digit code, and now the threat actor across the country or across the world in North Korea, in Russia, in China has your 6-digit code and they log in. You don't know it. And we've seen this multiple times in a weekend. And so what do you do about that? Well, our CTO finally said, we're putting in a service, everybody gets it, no questions, we're delivering it. And that is, if somebody logged in the state of Michigan and in North Korea, lock it down right now. Just shut it down, because that's a problem. So there are technological ways to handle these things sometimes, but certainly education and training, I think, is what you're talking about, is the primary way. Paranoia and vigilance.
Exactly. Yeah. Um, Let me talk some things you can do when you're dealing externally more and more, and a lot of this is predicated on the reality that third parties have our data nowadays, or we have frequent interactions with third parties who need our data. If you are in the scenario where you are typically a vendor, where you are sending out invoices, I would encourage you to include some of this language that you can see on this slide at the bottom of your invoices. Just put it on your template that so that it always goes out. We will never change our payment information via email, or some variation on that that works with your organization. This isn't going to be a cure-all, but certainly what it does is, one, reminds your customers of the appropriate process for changing payment information. And two, it stacks the deck a little bit more in your favor if there is an issue in the future and they misdirect a payment because of a compromised account. You can go back and point to your invoice and say, you shouldn't have done that. We've been telling you we wouldn't change our payment information via email. Now you need to pay us back the full amount. On the flip side, if you are typically a customer in a lot of situations, here's some language that you can include in your contract, your services agreement, whatever it is, your purchases agreement, that essentially says the goal of this is you as a customer that says, if we receive a change in payment information from you, and it's a legitimate communication, then we are entitled to rely on that. And if we make a payment to a compromised account because you have been compromised and we received a legitimate, what looked like a legitimate request, we're not going to repay that amount to you. So this are some things, some practical things you can do to at least stack the legal deck a little bit more in your favor if you find yourself in this situation. I want to just talk briefly about the response plan. What happens if you do find yourself here? You realize, like, oh crap, I sent that wire that I shouldn't have. I sent, or we think this payroll or this employee has been compromised on the payroll side of things. Time really is of the essence. You want to contact your managed services, your provider, to help them, or to have them help you deal with that. You want to contact your bank immediately. In my conversations with the FBI and with bank authorities, you really have like a 24 to 48-hour window in which you can potentially recover that money. When you start getting outside of that window, your chances dramatically decrease in being able to get that money back when it's been wired to an account that is more often than not offshore somewhere. So contacting your managed services provider, contacting your attorney, contacting the FBI through an IC3 report. That's just ic3.gov. Those reports go to your local FBI office. Those are the things that can help you immediately if you find yourself, like we're talking, within the first few hours, 24 hours of finding yourself in this position. You want to make sure you have policies in place so that you know what to do, so that folks who may not be normally living with this day in and day out are able to understand what that would be. Also, if somebody isn't around to inform them of that. These things rarely happen at a convenient time. Mike and I have seen this. They happen close to the weekend, close to holidays, times when people are really busy trying to wrap up things or just get out of the office generally. And that hustle and bustle is really when threat actors are most likely to come after you and try to execute some of these issues. But when you've had one of them hit, contact Mike, contact me, contact the FBI. And really, the faster you do that, the more likely you are in that situation to be able to undo the transaction or the action that resulted in the misdirected funds. And with that, I will hand it back to Mike. We're happy to take any questions, whether you want to put them in the chat or in the Q&A section. And back to Mike.
You bet, Jody. When we get to the gift card, if there's any questions, we'll take them then. So thank you, Nate. Excellent, excellent, excellent. And the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, known as CISA, part of the Department of Homeland Security for the federal government, has their core four for October Cybersecurity Month. They are use strong passwords and a password manager, identity management. Secondly, two-factor authentication. We talked about that, but the threat actors are smart enough to figure out how to get past that. We talked about that too. So identity management, a password, a complex, a long password, length over strength, length over complexity is what we recommend. And then two-factor authentication, like Nate said, recognize and report scams to your employer, to your technology department, to your technology provider, I3. Update your software. The most fundamental thing we can do, Nate and I were talking earlier about a recent incident that appears to be from just basically patching operating systems and computers. Seriously, layers of technology. Update your software. And then I add two bonus ones. Back up your stuff. I mean, personally, just make sure your phone and photos are backed up to the cloud, please. I had a friend recently lose 3 months worth of photos. It's like, oops, made a mistake. Make sure your stuff personally and in business is backed up. And then EDR, MDR, some sort of next generation antivirus that takes your protection to the next level. We have another webinar coming up next month. It's our own Lee Hill, who used to work at Apple, is an Apple Mac specialist. We'll be talking about modern device management, integrating Macs and iPhones into a Windows network, into enterprise IT. That's coming up on November 13. Look for invites and registration for that. I will turn it over to Jody. Any questions and or the gift card drawing?
Hi, it is Jody here, and we do not have any questions so far. So we will move on to our gift card drawing. And today's winner is Keith Johnston. So congratulations to Keith Johnston. I will be sending that over via email sometime today.
Very good. Thank you, Jody, and congratulations, Keith. In technology, we talk about right of boom and left of boom. And today we're talking with Nate at Warner Norcross and Judd about staying left of boom. The boom being the incident. Oops, I have to call the FBI, my insurance company, and my attorney. Boom. We want to stay left of boom. We can help you stay left of boom. We recommend layers of technology, and regretfully, the threat actors keep using new means to thwart our protection, and therefore the layers of protection keep moving forward. And your risk is personal. How you handle it is up to you. Thank you, Nate, for your time, and that is a wrap.
Thank you, everyone.